I'm going to have a go at reassembling these Weber carburettors from Lotus Elan. I've got the service kit, I've got the manual, and I've got all the parts which are all cleaned up as best I could without sending them for blasting, which would have been quite expensive. Could always be done at a later date. So I'm going to leave them in this sort of state, a bit of patina on them. We'll see how I go on. You'll see it's already got the butterfly valves in and the spindle and the bearings. I decided not to take those out because they felt in good condition, and I was worried I would do more damage if I took them out. You'll see there's a little pin holding this, what they call the pump control lever. It also has a return spring, so if I pull it down, got a light shining in it, hopefully you can see it, which is going to pull the butterfly valves closed. It's hooked on here, so if you needed to take that out, you have to take that little plate out. Next step for me is to put in some grease and some dust covers back on the bearings. The carburettors have been stripped down to this point and then ultrasonically cleaned. We took the little dust covers off the bearings, and I'm using a lithium based grease. And I've chosen to use that because that's what the manual says. These are the little dust seals. I'm going to put them on with this sort of glossy face inwards. So I've just started to push one on there. And then there's a spring goes on to push that in, and then a little dust cover piece. I just got a bit of wood, put a hole in so that I can press that on. So that's pressed in. Of having to stretch these seals, otherwise they're gripping too tightly onto the spindle and stopping it, believe it or not, stopping it closing properly. So with that spring return, so just making sure that it does properly close. I'm also putting a little bit of lubrication on the end of the spring in there, because it sort of rotates around as it's opened. This is one of the chokes that go in each of the barrels, and there's a little slot in the barrel, and there's a little pin in the side of the choke, so that slides in with that in the correct place, just drops down inside. There's a little cutout in the top. There's actually two, but only one's used on each. So that slots in a different place, aligns this groove with a hole on the top of the barrel where fuel comes in. And then these are the auxiliary venturis. So hole where fuel comes in, and that goes into the centre. There's like a tapered cutaway of that shape, it's like an aerofoil shape in there. And there's a little spring clip, so those push into the barrels using that same groove. And that pushes up against the choke, and that spring clip holds it in place, unlike the other side which doesn't have it in yet. So they're in place. There's a little cover plate that covers this hole, and the service kit has a new gasket that goes in. So I feel as though we should have polished all these. Anyway, it's not going to get seen, that one. Tiny little screws, these are the originals. Little brass screws, I think. On the ends of the spindles there's washers. I think I'll probably replace these just because they look a bit scruffy really. But you can see it's got a double flatted sided hole that pushes on the spindle, and then these little lock tabs which again got those double flat sided hole which goes on the spindle. Again, probably replace those and the nuts. So the nut screw on, and you tighten up not too tight and then bend that tab over to stop the nuts coming undone. This is obviously one of a pair of these carburettors, and this is the centre, so this is between the two carburettors, and this is the piece that works for the Lotus Elan. So this is where the throttle cable, sorry, not showing you it properly, this is where the throttle cable joins, and the return spring is in here as well. So this fits on that end instead of the washer, and you'll see here there's a little bent metal tab which is aligned with that threaded hole, and that's where this screw with the spring to retain it, stop it moving. Once it's screwed, that screws into there and it pushes down on that little tab. There, you can just see it coming through the body now maybe. So by adjusting that up and down it will position this, which obviously positions where the butterfly valves are, and this bit of the tab goes into another bracket, which is this one, which fixes onto the end of the other carburettor with like a spring piece in here, so it's always pushed in the correct direction against that tab. I'll show you that later. This is part of the what I'll call the choke mechanism, cold start mechanism. So we've got little shaft gear, little tab on it, goes in there and meshes with this other one. So, yeah. So as you turn that, they're going to rotate round. So, and then there's a spring, return spring. I think there's a little hole in there that this spring goes into. And then a lever goes on there and hooks, the spring hooks into it there, I guess. So it's got a return spring. So got the nut on. So you can see the way those little levers are moved. So this will be, if you pull the choke cable, it would pull these. Operates these two little, I don't know whether you call them barrels or not. What do the book call them? Starter valves. It's a starter valve. They drop down into these holes. Just see that slot, and it's that large slot that's going to get moved by those little levers on the cold start device. And at the bottom of there's a blooming big hole, and it runs through to that hole there. That hole there. So obviously massively richens the mixture if you lift these valves up, and they're lifted by these. Oop. So if I fit that on, there we are, they're on. when I operate that lever, you can see it lifts up those two valves and opens up a channel for fuel to extra fuel to come out. There are springs that sit in the back of those, keep them pushed down. And there's a piece that sits on top of the spring. Funny little shaped bit. What do we call this? Spring retainer and guide. So designed to sit on top of the spring, and that pushes down into there. And then there is a washer, which is going to clip into the little groove in the top, which is here. Clean these up. So you can see it's got a little split in it, so that's going to squeeze into that slot. So I'll just have a quick go at that. I'll just clean this up first. Okay, I assume they are going to be held in by the top. So, and the spring is clearly very light, so they're in, and that goes on and can move those valves up and down. I'm just trying to show you those tiny little holes down there. Hopefully you can see them. I'm not sure how good the focus is. Try to get some light in there. Maybe that helps. So as the butterfly opens up, it reveals those three holes. They're progression holes, I think, called in the book. So fuel will come out of those as you open this. So it's adding additional fuel as you start to increase the revs. You can see there's another little hole here as well, and they align themselves, the other side of those holes are in these, so you can see the three holes down there, I hope, and there's another one down the bottom here, and this one that's just an inspection hole. The fuel, I think, comes through from here, from this one sideways into it. There's another hole in the side. I'm not sure about the focus on this. Maybe you can see that. And it's just an inspection hole, I guess, how they drilled them. Oh no, there's a hole there, look, as well, that side. You can see there must be a route through, you can sort of see it in the casting. So this little cover screw just covers up those holes. That's the next thing to go on. Okay, just pop all those in. In this little cold start device thing, there's a bit of mesh has to go in here. I've just cleaned up the original, and there's a tiny slot that it goes into. That pushes in. If we can get it aligned, it'll go in. Just encourage it. There we are. So I've just put that little cable retaining screw on for the choke cable, cold start cable. So those little grooves in the valves have to line up with these little spigoty bits. So that's operating, and then there's just a couple of screws to hold that in. This is a starter jet. Hopefully you can see what's written on the side there. It says 100 F5. So that goes in the starter jet holes, which I believe are these. So there's a couple of those to go in. I believe this is called a pump jet. I'll just be able to see a number on there. I think it says 4.0. It's got a very tiny hole at the bottom, very tiny, teeny tiny, in line with that flat, and larger holes on the top. So, little metal ring washer, they call it a gasket, goes on, and then that goes into the carburettor, and this tiny, teeny tiny hole you see from inside the carburettor. So if I drop that in to here, it goes in this hole. So hopefully you can see down there, that's where it sticks out. It fits in that little cap that was in the choke and sits in the top there. This little clamping screw goes on the top. This is the intake discharge valve, which sits in the bottom of the inside of the carburettor. So it sits right down inside there. In this hole, threaded hole here, goes a little ball bearing, which I've got here. So that sits down in the bottom, and on top of that, a little rectangular square section piece sits on top of the ball, and then there's a cap screw just to cap that off. And that, I think it's title here, Accelerator Pump Delivery Valve Ball. I think it acts as a non-return valve, so it allows fuel one way but not the other. So it lets the accelerator pump fill up with fuel, and then when you use the accelerator, the ball stops the fuel going back the other way. So that should rattle around in there. Yep, can hear that moving. So I'll put the other ones in. Parts of the accelerator pump. Little plate that goes on that way. A big long spring goes over this little hook arrangement. Just hold that out for a minute, and then this little piston. It's got a little bar pushed into it, so you drop that on and twist it around and it hooks on. That spring goes in the middle. So, little accelerator pump type arrangement. And this accelerator pump arrangement goes in here. That plate pushes into the top. So the top plate is going to hold these down so they can't just drift out over time. So there is the ball that we put in, and that little square section rectangle piece that sits on top of it. And there's that piston with its spring arrangement. And it shows obviously that path of the fuel goes around that one. So here's the jet that we put in as well that you could see inside. So as you press the throttle, it's going to bring this down. I think that's the right arrangement. Yeah, here we are. So this is this piece that's fixed to the spindle. So as you open the butterflies, that must allow this to drop down. And we'll push that piston down, which will push fuel into the jet. And when it goes the other way, goes back up again, that ball will, well, it want to suck fuel out of there basically and fill itself up again, ready for you to whack your foot down on the throttle again, thump, which will push down and push more fuel in quickly. So as I operate the throttle, you can see that arrangement pushes that piston down very quickly. Bottoms out about there, then you open them up. Just check the other one. Seems to be operating nice and smoothly. This is the idle adjustment screw, new ones. All the parts, by the way, I bought from Eurocarb, and there's a spring that goes around the outside. And the book says there's an O-ring and a conical washer, so I assume there should be a conical washer here and then an O-ring under it to give some sort of seal against the hole as you screw it in. I definitely didn't have that when I took it apart, so I will see if I can get those conical washers. If I'll check and fit them. Anyway, let me put it in anyway without that. So the idle adjustment screws fit in here. So as I say, the book says should be a conical washer and an O-ring. I guess that's to give it some sort of seal. And if I refocus, hopefully you can see a tiny little hole there. So the idle adjustment screw will change the amount of fuel that is coming out of that hole. And that's obviously bringing fuel in whilst this is more or less closed anyway. Similarly, you can see the hole for the choke the cold start arrangement. On the cold start arrangement, not sure if I've said already, it's a bit of a waste of time on these cars, the Elans, I think. I had an Elan +2 before this one, and I never used the cold start, it just wasn't necessary. This is the idler jet, or one of the idler jets. I'm not sure if you can see what it says. I think it says 45F9 on the side. It's got a tiny hole in the end. Won't be able to see light through it, not sure. Oh yeah. And a tiny hole on the side. And that plugs into this, which is the idler jet holder. Some holes around the periphery, and oops, that pushes in there. And that fuel comes into this and then is mixed with air, I think. So the idler jets fit in here. First bit has to screw in. You can feel that bottoming out. These are the parts that make up the bit that, well, the main jet I suppose. That's the main jet. It's got a number on the side of it. I think it says 115. Yeah, 115. Main jet. Emulsion tube. So where the air gets mixed with the fuel. There's a number on it somewhere. There it is. I'm pretty certain that says F11. Yep. Air correction jet. Got a number on the side. Pretty sure it says 200. And that's a sort of holder at the top that it screws into the body with. So I'll just put it together. Getting it the right way up would help. So the jet goes in that end, which is the bottom. It's going to sit that way so fuel comes in that way, I think. That's the way it works. And this air correction jet at the top. Oh, that's tight. Nice little sprung out bit. There we go. And then this holder on the top. And that screws in to the top. I'll just show you the diagram of how it works. So I'll show you where it goes first. So it goes in this one. Well, you can see holes at the bottom because I haven't got the bottom cover plate on. So it goes in there. So a diagram that shows the main jet, which is the one I've just put in there. So I think the idea is fuel comes up and then gets mixed with air. Air's coming in there and then goes down to the centre of the carburettor where it's fed into the engine, mixed with air. And there's the other jet, the idler jet, which we put in earlier, which is shown on this diagram up here. So fuel coming up, getting mixed with air, going in through either the idler jet or those holes as that valve opens, starts to pull in fuel through those extra holes. It's all rather beautiful, very analogue solution in our digital age of fuel injection and all electronic mapping. So I guess all of that, different sized jets and emulsion tubes, was all the analogue version of that mapping. There's a little inlet valve, needle valve, to go in the cover in there. This is the new one that came. Packaging it came in, it says 1.75 372D, and it's got a little needle valve, get it the right around, that fits inside, and it's got a ball bearing on the end which has got a spring inside it, and you need a new little gaskety washer to screw it before it screws into the top. Get that screwed in. Okay. New gasket to go on there as well. These are the floats. Checked them by putting them in hot water and looking for bubbles coming out, and we've got a new pin, fulcrum pin, so they sit in there. Pin pokes through this side, and the other side there's a split in the casting, and you have to push the pin, and the idea is it's gripped to that side, so I'll just have a go at that very carefully, see if that works. I seem to tap in on one of them pretty easily. I used this as my hammer. You can see it doesn't take very much force and it's in. So that's going to, as those float up, it's going to push against the little needle valve and stop any more fuel coming in. You can adjust these little tabs here and the one going down there. It's difficult to see here. That control the sort of fully open position and the closed position when it's just touching that ball on the valve, and it gives dimension in the book. So you put I use the end of a drill, 8.5mm gap, and it just touches the ball to the cover, the gasket on the cover, and 15mm gap when it's open, and you have to adjust those tabs, bend those tabs slightly to make the adjustment. Should point out it says to ignore this seam, so I've done it to this main part of the body, which is slightly different height to this other part. So that's where I took my dimensions. I've got to fix the bottom covers on with the new gasket, cover that hole at the bottom, I've got new screws because there's one of the original screws. Let me just there's one of the original screws. It's like a cheese head cross cut. One of the original screws is sort of nearly the same, but most of them are this, which look like sort of panhead to me, which is a bit disappointing. So I'll contact them, see if they can do a better match. So fix this bottom cover in with the new gasket. Use the worst of the screws, the old screws that I've just cleaned up a bit. I'll see about getting some new ones. There's a little aluminium cover plate, just sits in there. And then the new gasket on this top cover, that can now fit in here. And that gets screwed down, so I'll fit all the fixing screws. So that's screwed down, and then I've got bought a new cover, got a new gasket to go in there. And that's a little cover screws on the top. This is a little fuel filter that sits into the top where the fuel comes in. The new one that's been supplied is plastic. The old one that I've got is brass, which I've cleaned up. I think I'm tempted to use the brass one. So this fits over some little cast support pieces, and then a new washer, gaskety washer, and that screws on the top. That houses a filter that just needs tightening up, and then the inlet, which is a banjo type connection, has this fitting, so be a couple of washers either side of the banjo, and that screws into there like so. There are some trumpets which fit here. Haven't cleaned these up yet. The trumpets get clamped by these, some little brackets go across and just catch onto that edge, but they don't get fitted until there's an airbox goes across both carbs, so all four trumpets get clamped in at that stage. And this side goes onto the inlet manifold side of the engine. So about as much as we can do for now. On the ends of the shafts we've got this bracket arrangement, which is where the accelerator cable is going to attach, and there's a return spring hook through there as well. And then on the other carburettor we've got this, which fits on the end of that shaft, and that little tab from the first one is going to go through, so the accelerator cable ends up operating both carburettors together. So this is a pin with a little split pin through it and a spring around it, and then this one's got an adjusting screw with a spring just to lock the screw in place. You can see on the cover Weber carburettor, it's got the type here 40 DCOE 18 and the serial number. So that's it for this video. Both carburettors pretty much together. I have to decide what to do about these ugly fixing screws, and next time we see these hopefully they'll be on the car.